Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving right into a challenge that, honestly, every single organization faces, but very few actually master. We're looking at the architecture of customer retention. If you've ever found yourself wondering, why are we really losing our customers, especially after throwing massive budgets and brilliant teams at the problem? Well, this explainer is definitely for you. We all realize that acquiring a new customer is incredibly expensive, but we so often leave the back door wide open, just letting valuable clients quietly slip away. So we're going to unpack the actual structural and psychological barriers driving them away. We're moving way past the superficial metrics to look at how a business truly interacts with the people it serves, and we'll figure out where those foundational cracks actually begin.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, why we lose customers, the uncomfortable truths.
So why do we really lose customers? It's a stark question, right? And usually we're super quick to grab onto comfortable answers. We point our fingers at a turbulent economy, we blame aggressive competitors undercutting our prices, or we just point to unpredictable market shifts. It's incredibly easy to blame external factors because, let's be honest, doing that essentially lets leadership off the hook. But the reality challenges those passive assumptions. It forces us to look inward rather than outward to find the true root cause of customer churn. It is way harder to hold a mirror up to our own internal operations than it is to just blame the weather. But true retention, that starts with absolute honesty. Just listen to this foundational quote from the source material. Most organizations fail to listen to their customers. That's it. That is the primary failure right there. It's not a failure of tech, it's not a lack of marketing reach or some tiny advertising budget. It is a fundamental, profound lack of listening. Think about it for a second. Businesses today collect mountains of data. They track complex usage metrics, they blast out automated surveys, but are they actually hearing what the customer is saying between the lines? Gathering data points is not the same as actively listening to friction points. The text identifies this profound deafness as the absolute starting point of customer loss. If you aren't listening, everything else you build is resting on incredibly shaky ground. Which brings us to part two, the problem with silos, divided we fall. So what's actually causing this listening failure? The text explicitly points the finger at silos. As organizations grow, they naturally tend to isolate their thinking. When teams, departments, or individual leaders operate in these silos, they create massive, invisible blind spots. Imagine a customer's voice entering one part of your business. Say it's a frustrated support ticket handled by a rep, or maybe a hesitant objection on a sales call. Because of these silos, that vital, immediate feedback gets entirely trapped in that one specific department. It never makes its way over to product development, it never bubbles up to the executive team. These silos prevent cohesive listening, meaning the organization as a whole stays completely deaf to what the customer actually needs, even when that customer is literally screaming it right at them.
Next up is section 3. We're calling this the product ego trap, the hubris of the best. This disconnect is brilliantly illustrated when we contrast our internal view with the external reality. Internally, organizations trapped in these silos often fall hard for their own hype. They spend so much time building and perfecting their offerings that they start to genuinely believe, hey, our products and services are simply the best on the market. It's pure organizational ego. It's the hubris of assuming you've already achieved perfection. But when we look at the external result, the danger becomes terrifyingly clear. Because you assume your product is already the best, you subconsciously stop seeking out genuine feedback. You stop asking how to improve because, well, you assume there's nothing left to fix. You fail to listen, and ultimately you lose the customer to someone who is still hungry enough to ask questions. That internal delusion of superiority, it directly and inevitably creates the harsh reality of customer departure. All right, let's pivot to the solution in part 4, creating a retention strategy from ego to action.
We can't just diagnose the problem and walk away, right? We need a remedy. The framework we're looking at breaks down into a clear, actionable two-step process designed to move an entire organization out of that ego-driven silo mentality and into a highly proactive state. It's about taking all those uncomfortable truths we just uncovered and using them as the actual building blocks for a sustainable solution. This isn't about slapping a temporary band-aid on a declining user base. No, this is a fundamental rewiring of how a business operates. Let's look at how this two-step architecture empowers you to completely rewrite your narrative and permanently seal that back door.
Step 1, identify the loss factors. The core goal here is to figure out the specific factors leading you to lose a customer. But notice what this actually requires in practice. You cannot accurately identify these factors if you're stuck in an ego trap, mistakenly thinking your product is utterly flawless. And you definitely can't do it if you're stuck in a silo, cut off from crucial cross-departmental data. This first step demands a massive cultural shift from the top down. You must step outside those barriers, actively open your ears, and honestly assess the specific, often painful reasons why customers are choosing to walk out the door. It requires setting pride aside and inviting criticism right into the boardroom.
And finally, step 2, create your strategy. Once the hard, ego-bruising work of identifying the real factors causing loss is complete, it is time to build a strategy specifically tailored to retain the customer. But let's be completely clear here. This isn't just a generic marketing plan or a loyalty discount code. A strategy built on this architecture cannot be founded on assumptions, past historical successes, or corporate ego. A truly successful retention strategy has to be a direct, highly proactive response to what you've actually learned by finally tearing down those silos and listening to your base. It's about actively designing a company that flexibly adapts to the customer's needs, rather than stubbornly expecting the customer to adapt to you. The entire architecture of customer retention hinges on this exact pivot. It is not about designing a supposedly perfect product in a vacuum, completely insulated from the outside world. It is about aggressively tearing down the internal walls that keep the customer's true voice out. It's a shift from defending what you've built to evolving what you offer. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, critical question to consider within your own teams and your own workflows. Are you truly ready to step out of your silo and actually start listening? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.